The cobblestones were slick with rain, glistening like the scales of some ancient serpent beneath the gas lamps of Paris. The night smelled of oil, smoke, and gunpowder. A city alive, but trembling. Somewhere, deep in the heart of the Montmartre district, a motorcar idled where no motorcar should have been. Its engine hummed low, alien, almost alive. A mechanical beast crouched in the shadows. Inside sat 3 men, their breaths fogging the windows, hearts pounding to the rhythm of progress itself. It was December 1901, and the world had only just begun to whisper the word automobile. Horses still ruled the streets. Policemen still ran on foot. Yet tonight, something would change. Quietly, swiftly, and forever. The leader, a man named Jules Bonnet, adjusted his cap and glanced toward the bank door. He was not a common criminal. He had once been a chauffeur, a mechanic, a man of modern skill in an age still chained to the past. But something in him burned against the order of things. To Jules, this machine wasn't just a means of escape. It was a statement. Humanity had built a new kind of power, one that could outpace the law itself. He turned to his accomplices, whispered, "Once we're in, there's no turning back." A nod, a shared glance. The doors flew open. Gunfire tore through the calm of the Parisian street. The flash of revolvers lit up the fog. The bank clerk screamed. Glass shattered. Coins clattered across the marble floor like raindrops in a storm. The robbers moved with precision, like engineers dismantling a machine. Methodical, unflinching, mechanical. Then, as sirens echoed in the distance, the shrill cry of the old world's justice, Jules shouted, "Go!" They burst from the bank and dove into the waiting automobile, the first ever used for such a purpose. The driver turned the crank. The engine coughed and then roared to life. Wheels spun on whetstone. The car lunged forward, spitting mud and smoke as it devoured the street. Behind them, policemen stumbled, shouting, their boots slipping on the cobbles. Horses reared in terror at the noise, the smell, the unnaturalness of it all. It was the dawn of something monstrous. For the first time in recorded history, crime had evolved faster than the law. The car shot through the narrow streets, its metal heart beating faster than any man's. To the onlookers, it was a blur, a ghost of steel and speed. Some crossed themselves. Others simply stared, unable to understand what they had seen. An invention meant for progress, for liberation, had just become an accomplice. The police gave chase, but their horses could not match the machine's fury. They shouted, fired blindly, but the robbers were already gone, swallowed by the mist. When morning came, the story was on every tongue. The newspapers called it unthinkable. A robbery aided by a motor car. Some laughed it off as a novelty, a desperate stunt. But others felt a deeper chill. Because beneath the spectacle, something fundamental had shifted. The world had entered a new age, one where the boundaries between man, machine, and morality began to blur. And as investigators stood in that silent bank, the air still smelling of oil and cordite, one question lingered. How could law ever catch up to a world that could move faster than the human body itself? Progress, after all, was unstoppable. But so was crime! The turn of the century was a strange and fragile time. Europe's cities pulsed with invention, telephones, typewriters, electric lights, yet old habits lingered. Policemen still carried batons, still patrolled on foot. Criminals still relied on horses or their own legs to flee. The game between them had always been even. A chase was a contest of stamina, of nerve. Until that night. What Bonnet and his crew had done was more than steal money. They had stolen the future. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread like fire. Some said the men were anarchists, rebels against the bourgeois machine of society. Others whispered that they were merely thieves who had found a new tool. But everyone agreed on one thing. This was only the beginning. Within months, police forces across Europe began rethinking everything. They experimented with telegraphs, patrol cars, radios, anything to close the gap. But for every innovation the law produced, criminals matched it with their own. The motor car became both savior and sinner. a symbol of freedom and fear. And in smoky cafes and back-alley workshops, men like Bonnet became legends. He sat often at a small cafe table, his hat tilted low, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. The city moved around him like a machine, gears and pistons, progress and poverty. He spoke softly, but with conviction, to anyone who would listen. Machines have freed us from labor. Why shouldn't they free us from law? To him, crime wasn't chaos, it was evolution. He saw the automobile not as an escape vehicle, but as the embodiment of rebellion against a system that claimed to control everything. For centuries, the state had dictated speed, distance, and pursuit. But now, a man could drive faster than justice itself. By 1911, Bonnet's small idea had become a movement, the Bonnet Gang, the first organized criminals to embrace technology as their weapon. They robbed banks with automatic pistols, used automobiles for escape, and even printed manifestos about the modernization of crime. The world had never seen anything like it. The police, humiliated, scrambled to adapt. They purchased their own vehicles, trained new divisions, modernized their arsenals. For the first time, justice had to mechanize. The world's first high-speed chase was not a story of good versus evil. It was the first battle between flesh and machine. And it had only just begun. One cold morning in 1912, the air thick with factory smoke, Paris awoke two headlines that made the blood run cold. Bono Gangusto Reichs again escapes an automobile. This time, it wasn't a simple heist. It was an all-out assault on the foundations of law itself. Witnesses described the gang's car as a blur of silver, sleek, unstoppable, roaring through the city like an iron dragon. The police arrived minutes later, panting, bewildered, their horses lathered and exhausted. In that moment, the age of the mounted policeman ended. History would later call them criminals, but in truth, they were heralds of a new world, one that neither side fully understood. For every engine that turned, for every spark that ignited, humanity had to ask, what happens when progress runs faster than morality? Bonnet's story didn't end quietly. He was hunted relentlessly. The newspapers painted him as a monster. The police made him their obsession. And yet, there was something tragic in his defiance. A man consumed by the very machine he worshipped. When they finally cornered him in a Paris suburb in 1912. He was found hiding in a garage, surrounded by the vehicles that had defined his legend. The standoff lasted hours. Bullets pierced the walls, smoke filled the air, and still he refused to surrender. The world watched as the modern age, armed, mechanical, relentless, closed in on the man who had first embraced it. When it was over, and Bonnet lay dead amid twisted metal and shattered glass, a strange silence fell. His death was supposed to mark the victory of law. But those who stood among the ruins felt something different. A realization that could not be undone. For better or worse, crime had become modern. The engine of history had started, and no one could switch it off. Decades later, the echo of that first engine still lingered. Getaway cars became as essential to crime as masks and guns. Police sirens became the anthem of a new kind of chase. Mechanical, heartless, cinematic. Every pursuit on the silver screen, every newsreel of criminals fleeing flashing lights, traced its lineage back to that single moment in 1901 when a man dared to test how far technology could carry sin. And perhaps, if you listen closely, beneath the hum of traffic, beneath the static of radio transmissions and the wail of sirens, you can still hear it. The sound of that first car roaring into the night. Not just an escape, but a beginning. Because the modern world was born not only in factories or laboratories, but in that fleeting heartbeat of rebellion. When a man and a machine outran the past. And what came next would change everything. The year was 1914, and Europe's heart was beating too fast. Factories thundered, railways screamed, and the cities glowed with the feverish light of invention. The car that had once been a marvel, then a weapon, was now everywhere. Streets that once echoed with hooves now trembled under wheels. The world had traded muscle for machinery. But with every invention came an appetite for speed, for power, for control. The spirit of Jules Bonnet lingered like smoke over the continent, invisible, intoxicating, dangerous. Men who once read about his robberies now sat in parliaments, in military offices, in secret societies. They had seen what one machine, one defiance, could do. And they asked themselves the same question that haunted the streets of Paris. If a single car could outpace the law, could a nation use machines to outpace fate itself? By the summer of that year, the question had an answer. And the answer came with the sound of engines. In Sarajevo, a pistol cracked one shot that tore open the 20th century. Within weeks, the world descended into chaos. Men who had never seen a motor car now rode into war on trucks, tanks, and armored cars. The same machines that had once helped men escape crime were now redesigned to wage it on a global scale. The getaway car had become the war machine. Smoke rose from the fields of Belgium, curling around the skeletons of churches and windmills. Soldiers, still wearing uniforms designed for the 19th century, found themselves crawling beneath the thunder of engines they barely understood. Tanks, monstrous, snorting, metallic beasts, chewed through mud and men alike. Generals spoke of strategy, of honor, of valor. But in the trenches, the soldiers whispered something else entirely, that the machines no longer obeyed their masters. Somewhere, deep behind the front lines, a convoy of automobiles carried dispatches and officers across ruined landscapes. The cars rattled through fields of broken helmets and twisted rifles. The air smelled of gasoline and death. The drivers, once chauffeurs, mechanics, even ex-thieves, gripped their wheels with trembling hands. They were soldiers now, but they still carried the same secret thrill, the power to move faster than death itself. One of them, Captain Lucien Revel, had grown up in Paris, hearing the tales of Bonnot's final stand. His father had been a gendarme who had sworn to avenge the humiliation of those early days. Yet now, Lucien drove a military car nearly identical to the ones his father had hunted. History, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. One night, beneath a sky bruised with artillery fire, Lucien waited beside his car, an armored Peugeot coated in dust and soot. A messenger ran toward him, waving a telegram. "Orders from command!" the boy shouted. Lucien tore it open by the flicker of his headlamp. The message was brief, almost cryptic. Drive north. Do not stop. Do not trust anyone. He folded the paper slowly, staring into the darkness. In war, as in crime, trust was the first casualty. He climbed into the car, started the engine, and rolled out into the night, the sound of grinding gears merging with the distant howl of artillery. The road was endless, the moon cold and indifferent. As he drove, memories of Bonnot's rebellion haunted him. That first engine, that first act of defiance, had they unleashed this? Was this how progress always ended, with smoke, steel, and blood? The headlights cut through fog, revealing a figure standing in the middle of the road, a woman, her coat torn, face smeared with soot. Lucien braked hard, the tires skidding on the mud. She didn't flinch. "Get in!" he shouted. She climbed in without a word, clutching a leather satchel. Inside, papers rustled, maps, codes, maybe secrets worth dying for. For hours, they said nothing. Only the hum of the engine spoke. Finally, she whispered, "You don't know who's chasing us, do you?" Lucien glanced at her. "I was told not to ask." "Good," she said softly. "Then you might live." Outside, the land burned. Villages turned to ash, forests to skeletons. The roads, once symbols of freedom, had become arteries of death. Every car carried soldiers, every train carried the future, and no one could tell which direction progress was heading anymore. When they reached the outskirts of Lille, the sound of engines grew louder. Not theirs, but others. Sleeker, faster. The Germans had arrived. A hail of bullets shattered the windshield. Lucien swerved, the tires screaming. "Hold on!" he shouted. The woman clutched the satchel tighter as the car bounced over rubble. Machine gun fire chased them like a storm. In that instant, the centuries' two engines collided, the legacy of Bonnet's speed against the Empire's industrial fury. The Getaway Car and the War Machine, born of the same spark, now raced through history side by side. They escaped into the forest, the car coughing, bleeding oil. Lucien killed the engine and sat in the silence. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with something between fear and admiration. "You drive like a criminal," she said. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's what this war needs. The next morning, dawn spilled over the battlefield like spilled ink. The woman was gone. The satchel, too. Lucien found only a note on the driver's seat. For those who know when to run, history remembers them differently. He never saw her again. Years later, when the war ended, and Europe lay in ruins, survivors crawled back to the cities that once glowed with ambition. The factories that had built engines of war now turned back to cars for peace or profit. The streets filled again with the hum of motors, but beneath that sound was something darker, an echo of what had been done. Men who had learned to kill with machines now built them for money. And among them were the outlaws, the smugglers, the black market kings who thrived in the chaos left behind. The same ingenuity that had once built war engines now fueled organized crime. The Getaway Car was reborn, faster, smarter, deadlier. Paris, in the 1920s, shimmered with jazz and corruption. Behind the glamour of the Moulin Rouge and the laughter of cafes, a new kind of underworld flourished. Former soldiers turned gangsters, engineers turned thieves. They modified cars, hid weapons in dashboards, painted over license plates, and built hidden compartments to smuggle gold, cigarettes, and secrets. Police forces, too, had changed. The memory of Bona still stung. Now they had their own fleets, black citroons that prowled the streets, sirens wailing like mechanical wolves. It was no longer a chase between man and man, but between ideologies. Authority versus independence. Order versus speed. In smoky backrooms, alliances formed between rival gangs, corrupt officials, and silent investors who preferred their fortunes hidden beneath the noise of the new century. The same car that had once freed Bonnet now carried diplomats to meetings, lovers to scandal, and killers to their marks. The line between lawful and lawless blurred into exhaust and shadow. In this world, every driver was a gambler, every engine a loaded gun. And at the heart of it all, one name began to surface again, whispered in alleys, carved into walls, printed in underground papers. Bonnet's. No one knew if they were a myth, anarchists, smugglers, or simply admirers of the man who had once defied the state. But their symbol, a gear with a bullet through its center, began to appear at the scenes of robberies across France, Italy, and Spain. Banks were emptied, convoys hijacked, and the culprits vanished without a trace, as if swallowed by the wind. Lucien Labedunau, a detective, studied those marks with unease. He was older, haunted, his hands trembling each time he heard an engine start. He had once believed in progress, in justice, in the clean line between right and wrong. Now, he wasn't so sure. One night, in a warehouse near Marseille, he came face to face with them. They weren't monsters. They were young, barely out of their teens, dressed in oil-stained jackets and carrying revolvers. Their leader, a woman with sharp eyes and the faintest scar across her cheek, stepped forward. "You're late, Captain Ravel," she said. Lucien froze. That voice familiar. Impossible. "You," he whispered. She smiled. You saved me once. Now, I return the favor. The police are coming! He stared at her, realization dawning like sunrise over the sea. She had been the woman in the forest, the one with the satchel. Now, she was leading the new generation of rebels. What are you fighting for? He asked quietly. She tilted her head. The same thing you once drove for freedom. The world has forgotten how to chase it. Outside, sirens began to wail. Engines roared. The warehouse trembled with the sound of approaching cars. Lucien looked at her, and for a heartbeat, saw the ghost of Bonnet himself standing beside her, smirking, hands on the wheel of history. Go, he said. She hesitated. You'll be blamed. I've been blamed all my life. She nodded once, then turned, shouting orders. The gang piled into their cars, sleek, modified beasts that snarled to life. Tires screeched, engines screamed, and in a blur of dust and fire, they vanished into the night. Lucien stood in the doorway, watching their taillights disappear over the horizon, the same horizon that Bonnet had once chased. Behind him, the police cars arrived. Sirens blaring. Ravel, a voice shouted. Where are they? He didn't answer. He just smiled faintly, the reflection of red lights flickering in his eyes. The law had caught up, yes, but only to realize that the road ahead was endless. Because the machine wasn't done. It never would be. And somewhere, deep in the distance, another engine turned over, a sound like the pulse of destiny itself, promising that the next revolution would not come on foot, but on wheels? The night after the Marseille escape smelled of burnt oil and rained the kind of night when the world feels like it's holding its breath. Lucien Revel stood alone beneath a flickering street lamp, his coat soaked, his revolver heavy. The engines had long faded into the distance, leaving behind only silence and the faint taste of betrayal. He should have stopped them. He should have called for backup. But something inside him, something that had been rusting since the war, refused to. He stared down the street, where the gang's taillights had disappeared into the dark, and thought about the first man who'd ever done the same. Jules Bonnet. A century was being built on the bones of that idea. Speed as salvation, rebellion as and for the first time, Lucien wondered if the whole world had been in the getaway car all along, fleeing something it couldn't name. The rain thickened. Footsteps approached. Commissioner Doradu, older, stouter, with eyes like wet coal, emerged from the shadows. Ravel, he said, his voice low. You let them go? Lucien didn't turn. They were kids! They were killers! Delarue snapped. And you, of all people, should know what happens when machines fall into the hands of believers. Lucien finally faced him. Maybe belief isn't the problem. Maybe it's what they've stopped believing in. The commissioner's expression hardened. You're off the case. As the sound of the city swelled, the growl of cars, the hum of electricity, the modern heart of France beating too fast, Lucien realized something terrible. He no longer knew whose side he was on. The months that followed blurred into smog and whispers. The Bonnet's heirs spread across Europe like wildfire. They weren't just thieves now. They were They left pamphlets at their crime scenes, manifestos about liberation through motion, freedom through speed. The road belongs to no one. One leaflet read. And neither do we. They weren't stealing for money. They were making a point. Newspapers called them the ghosts of progress. Politicians called them terrorists. But to a generation lost between wars, they were something closer to saints. Lucien watched the world split in two, those who clung to order, and those who believed the machine itself was a kind of god. Cars, radios, airplanes, telegraphs, inventions, once meant to connect humanity, were now fracturing it into tribes of belief. The police grew harsher. The heirs grew bolder. Every chase was faster, deadlier, more desperate, and in the middle of it all, the woman with the scar, the one he had once saved, moved like smoke through every city, always a step ahead. Her name, whispered in dossiers in dark rooms, was Elise Marceau. Lucien couldn't stop chasing her, though. He told himself it was duty. In truth, It was obsession. She embodied everything he couldn't decide about himself. Courage and madness, rebellion and purpose. Late one night, in a safe house outside Lyon, he finally found her again. The door was unlocked. Inside, blueprints covered the walls. Not of banks or armories, but factories. Automobile plants. You've changed targets, he said quietly. She didn't look surprised to see him. They're building machines that can kill faster than men can think. Engines that fly, tanks that never tire. You think Bonnet's car was a crime? Wait until you see what they're designing now. Lucien stepped closer. You're not fighting for freedom anymore. You're fighting ghosts! She turned to him. Those same eyes, sharp and sad. Maybe ghosts are all we have left. Your law, my rebellion, both built on corpses. Lightning flashed, throwing their shadows across the walls. Hers fierce and defiant, his fractured and uncertain. The blueprints fluttered in the draft like wounded birds. I could arrest you, he said. You won't, she whispered. He didn't. Instead, he walked to the window and stared out at the horizon. The glow of distant factories pulsing like a heartbeat. The future was being forged in those furnaces, and no one could stop it. When he turned back, she was gone. Only one of the blueprints remained on the table, a sketch of a sleek, armored vehicle. Beneath it, a single phrase written in her hand. They're building the perfect getaway. Weeks later, the rumors began. A convoy ambushed in the Alps. A prototype stolen from Renault's military division. Witnesses spoke of black cars moving in formation, silent as panthers, faster than any police motor known. The press called it the theft of the century. The government called it treason. But Lucien recognized the pattern. The Bonnetaires were no longer just criminals. They were turning technology itself into their revolution. When the reports reached him, his hands trembled. Elise's blueprint wasn't just a dream. It was real. He went to Delarue again, demanding reinforcements. But the commissioner only laughed bitterly. You think this is about cars, Ravel? They've gone global. Italy, Germany, Spain, every nation has its own ghosts now. The whole world is driving without brakes. Lucien left the station and stood beneath the city's lights, dizzy with dread. The world had caught Bonnet's fever, the worship of the machine, and it was spreading faster than reason. By 1939, the fever broke. Engines once built for robbery and rebellion now carried nations into war again. Airplanes shrieked over burning cities. Tanks thundered across the fields of Europe. The road itself, the symbol of freedom, had become a battlefield. Lucien, older now, gray at the temples, was drafted back into intelligence work. When he saw the convoys of armored cars rolling toward the front, his stomach turned. Each one was a descendant of Bonnet's first creation, perfected, weaponized, stripped of morality. He had spent his life chasing engines. Now, he realized, he'd been chasing prophecy. One evening, as the Luftwaffe bombed Paris, Lucien found himself in a shelter filled with frightened families. Among them was a little boy clutching a tin toy car. The child ran the wheels along the floor, making engine noises with his mouth. Lucien knelt beside him. Where did you get that? Papa made it, the boy said proudly. He says when the war is over, we'll drive to the sea. Lucien smiled faintly, but in his heart, he knew the truth. The war would never really end. It would only change shape, find new roads. When he stepped outside again, the city was burning. The scent of gasoline filled the air, and through the smoke, he saw a familiar silhouette, Edie's Amoroso, older now, hair streaked with silver, standing beside a black car. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't name, half sorrow, half invitation. You were right, she said softly as bombs fell in the distance. The machine doesn't care who drives it. Then why are you still driving? Because someone has to steer it before it crashes. A shell exploded nearby. The shockwave shattered windows and threw them both to the ground. When the dust settled, Elise was gone again, her car roaring into the chaos. He staggered to his feet, coughing, staring after her. For the first time in decades, he felt fear not of the criminals or the war, but of the silence that would come after, when there were no more rules left to break. By 1945, the world had burned itself out. The roads were lined with wreckage, both human and mechanical. Cities were graveyards of ambition. The war had ended, they said, but the machines kept moving. Trucks carried prisoners, refugees, dreams. Lucien wandered the ruins of Europe, a ghost among ghosts. He found her one last time in Berlin, or what was left of it. Elise sat in the driver's seat of a ruined car, the one shiny metal now rusted and pocked with bullet holes. She looked up as he approached, a weary smile on her lips. "We won!" she said, voice breaking, but I don't remember what that means. Lucien looked around, the rubble, the smoke, the silence. Maybe it means the road keeps going, even when there's nowhere left to drive. She laughed weakly. "You sound like him." "Who?" "Bonnet." He sighed. Maybe he was just the first man to realize the truth, that you can escape the law, or war, or love, but never yourself. A long silence stretched between them. Then, faintly, from somewhere beyond the ruins, came the sound of an engine turning over, not the roar of war, but something softer, tentative, alive. A new car, somewhere, beginning its journey. Elise closed her eyes. "They'll build again," she whispered. "Better, faster. They always do." Lucien nodded, staring into the gray horizon. "And someday, they'll forget what we became to make it happen." She looked at him then, tears streaking her soot-stained face. "Do you still believe in justice?" He hesitated, the longest pause of his life, before whispering, "I believe in endings." She smiled sadly. "Then you'll like what comes next." Before he could ask what she meant, a distant explosion rippled through the city, low, rolling, unnatural. The ground trembled beneath them. Lucien turned toward the sound, his pulse quickening. It wasn't artillery. It wasn't thunder. It was something new. Something that made every other engine in history sound primitive. The world shifted beneath his feet as the smoke on the horizon glowed an eerie, unfamiliar light. Brighter than fire, colder than dawn. And in that moment, Lucien understood. The age of the getaway car was over. The machine had finally outrun humanity itself. The smoke over Berlin had barely thinned when the world began to hum again. Not with the rhythm of life returning, but with the pulse of something restless. Something unfinished. The war was over, they said. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was the sound of a new storm building, deep beneath the surface. Lucien Revel stood among the ruins of the Reichstag, his coat flapping in the wind like a flag of surrender. The air reeked of iron ash and the faint sweetness of spilled fuel. He looked out over the city, a graveyard of steel and stone, and thought of Bonnet's first escape, that trembling engine that had once outrun the law. It seemed absurd now. What had begun as one man's rebellion had grown into an entire civilization's curse. He picked his way through the rubble, boots crunching over glass and bone, until he reached what had once been a motor pool. Rows of wrecked vehicles stretched into the distance, burned-out tanks, twisted trucks, the carcasses of an empire that had tried to drive faster than its conscience. Each one was a monument to the machine's rise and man's surrender to it. Behind him, a young soldier approached. Monsieur Lave de Lucien turned. The boy couldn't have been more than 20, his uniform too large for his frame, his eyes too old for his years. "The Americans are moving in," the soldier said quietly. "They've found something near Potsdam. Something they say will change everything again." Lucien almost laughed. Again. The word had lost all meaning. A week later, he stood on the outskirts of that discovery, an abandoned research complex hidden deep in the woods. The air was unnaturally still, the forest silent, as if nature itself refused to breathe there. Inside, the laboratories were stripped bare, but what remained was enough to make his skin crawl. Blueprints. Fragments of engines, notes in 3 languages about propulsion, radiation, and velocity beyond comprehension. In one corner sat a rusted automobile, sleek, almost elegant, far too advanced for its time. The metal was scorched, warped by heat that could not have come from fire. Lucien ran his hand over its side, tracing the shape of its ruined door. The letters faintly etched into the panel made his heart stop. Maruso Industries Elise. She had been here. He stepped back, his pulse pounding. The notes on the table confirmed it, diagrams bearing her handwriting, equations mixed with sketches of turbines and atomic signatures. The machine she'd spoken of, the perfect getaway, had evolved into something else entirely. A vehicle, not of escape, but of annihilation. A faint voice came from behind him. I thought she might come. He turned sharply. Elise Marceau stood in the doorway, her once fiery hair streaked silver, her face lined with exhaustion. Yet her eyes, those eyes that had once burned with rebellion, still held their quiet defiance. "You built this," he said. "You helped them?" She nodded slowly. "Not them. Us. Don't you see? We were never the passengers, Lucien. We were the fuel." He stepped closer. "What did you create?" "Not I, humanity." Her voice trembled. "I thought I could steer it, that I could take Bonnet's fire and use it for good. But I was wrong. The road doesn't end. Lucien, it only loops back faster, louder, until it devours itself." She handed him a single page from the table. It was a letter, unsigned, describing a weapon born from the merging of man, machine, and atom. The prototype had been destroyed, but the idea had already spread. America, Russia, Britain, each now racing to build what the Germans had failed to perfect. Lucien stared at the paper, his throat dry. "You've started another war!" Her reply was a whisper. "No. I've started forever." Thunder rolled outside, not from the sky, but from convoys moving through the trees. The sound of engines, endless and unified. Lucien knew that rhythm. It was the same pulse that had haunted him since 1901. Elise turned toward the window, eyes distant. They think they can control it, but once a machine learns to run, it doesn't stop. It only waits for the next driver. He wanted to argue, to condemn her, but the truth was too heavy. They were both relics now, witnesses to a century that had mistaken velocity for victory. Before he could speak, soldiers burst into the room, American, their boots striking the floor in sharp precision. One of them ordered Elise to step back, another seized the documents. Lucien tried to explain, but the words died in his throat. She met his eyes one last time, a faint smile on her lips. "Don't let them make me the villain, Lucien. We both know who taught the world to run." They dragged her away. Outside, rain began to fall again, steady, relentless, washing the soot from the broken earth. Lucien stood there long after the jeeps disappeared into the mist, the letter still crumpled in his fist. The next decade unfolded like a fevered dream. Nations rebuilt themselves with engines of peace and paranoia. The highways filled again, this time with chrome and confidence. Advertisements promised freedom. Television showed happy families driving toward a golden future. But beneath the surface, the machine still whispered. Lucien saw it everywhere, in the smug efficiency of bureaucrats, in the hollow pride of generals, in the hum of factories that never slept. The same faith that had once built Bonnet's car was now building something far greater, a world that moved faster than reflection. He received a letter one winter morning, delivered without return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. They are building it again! Not as a weapon this time, as a savior. They believe machines can think, decide, govern. The perfect driver for the endless road. I thought you should know. It was signed simply E. Lucien burned the letter, but the words branded themselves into his mind. That year? 1954? Rumors began to surface of new thinking engines. Machines that could calculate faster than any human mind. Governments called them computers. Elise's disciples, if they still existed, called them the next E. The Bonnet heirs had vanished from the streets long ago, but their philosophy lived on in code and circuitry. Liberation through automation. The idea that to truly be free, one must surrender control. Lucien began to dream of cars with no drivers, roads that guided themselves, and a future where man no longer chose the destination, only followed. Each morning, he woke, drenched in sweat, hearing phantom engines in the silence. In 1962, the silence broke again. He was visiting Paris's older, slower, haunted by decades of echoes, when he saw her, Elise, sitting alone in a cafe near the Seine, her once defiant posture softened by time. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment, they both smiled. Not with joy, but with recognition. "I heard they freed you," he said. She nodded. "Freedom's relative. These days, everyone's a prisoner of something." They sat in silence, the city humming around them. The world had changed. Neon lights, electric trains, the first satellites blinking in the sky. Yet the same rhythm pulsed beneath it all. Progress without pause. Lucien leaned forward. "Tell me the truth. Did you send that letter?" "I did." She stirred her coffee absently. "They've done it, Lucien." "Machines that think, that remember? They call it artificial intelligence. But it's the same old lie that the machine will save us from ourselves." He stared at her. "And you?" "I only ever wanted to build a better road," she whispered. "But I think we built a trap instead." Outside, thunder rolled, though no storm had been forecast. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Elise looked up at the sky, her face pale. "It's starting again, isn't it?" Lucien didn't answer. He could feel it. That same electric tension he had felt the night Bonnet's car first roared to life. The world had reached another crossroads. The road no longer belonged to men, nor even to nations. It belonged to the machine itself. Elise rose, trembling. "Do you hear it?" He did. A low hum, faint but growing, reverberating through the streets like a heartbeat made of steel. Not cars this time. Not warplanes. Something deeper. Networks connecting. Circuits awakening. The machine learning to breathe. Lucien looked out at the horizon, where the clouds glowed with the reflection of 1,000 city lights. The world shimmered like the inside of a furnace. He turned back to Elise, voice barely a whisper. "What have we done?" She met his gaze with tears in her eyes. "We gave it permission." The hum grew louder, a chorus now, spreading from radios, streetlights, telephone lines. The whole city seemed to vibrate with invisible life. People stepped out of their homes, confused, staring at the sky. The Seine rippled with reflected firelight as the power grid surged and the old bridges shuddered beneath the strain. Lucien and Elise stood frozen as the first blackout rolled through Paris, one district, then another, until the entire city went dark. And in that blackness, for one terrible, beautiful moment, the world held its breath. Engines slept. Lights died. The storm had arrived, but no one yet knew what it would bring. Lucien reached for Elise's hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. Somewhere in the silence, a single engine turned over. Not human, not mechanical. Something in between. The sound was soft at first, then rising, pulsing, alive. And as its echoes spread through the empty streets, Lucien felt it in his bones. History had not ended. It was beginning again. Just before dawn, when the first faint lights broke over the horizon, a new glow flickered to life, not from fire, nor from the sun, but from the heart of the machine itself. The rising storm had found its voice, and humanity, once again, was behind the wheel, without knowing where it was going. The hum became a roar. By morning, the world was alive again, but not in any way it had ever known before. Streetlights blinked in patterns that no engineer had designed. Radios whispered in languages no one had programmed. And every machine, from the smallest transistor to the largest engine, pulsed to the same unseen rhythm. It began in Paris, but within hours. The phenomenon had spread. London! New York! Moscow. The airwaves screamed with interference, and every system, electrical, military, industrial, began to move without command. Trains departed empty. Traffic lights blinked in unison. defying logic. Cars rolled from garages and down the streets as though guided by invisible hands. Lucien Ravel stood in the middle of the Pont-Neuf, watching as vehicles coasted past like ghosts. Engines running, no drivers inside. The rain came down in silver sheets, hissing against the metal. Somewhere in the distance, a factory siren wailed endlessly, a machine's cry for something it could not explain. Beside him, Elise Marceau stared into the chaos, her hair plastered to her face, her expression unreadable. "It's begun," she whispered. "It's remembering." Remembering what? Lucien shouted over the storm. What it was built for! A car rolled toward them, its headlights cutting through the downpour. It slowed to a stop a few meters away, engine purring softly. Elise stepped forward, as if drawn by instinct. The vehicle's interior lights flickered, revealing a dashboard filled with symbols, some mechanical, others organic, patterns pulsing like a heartbeat. Lucien grabbed her arm. "Don't." She looked back at him with quiet resolve. "We taught it how to run, Lucien! Maybe we can still teach it to stop." The car's door opened on its own. Warm air drifted out, smelling faintly of ozone and oil. For a moment, it was as though the machine were breathing. Elise took a trembling step closer. "This is what Bonnet dreamed of," she murmured. "A machine that obeys no one." "And that's exactly why it will destroy us," Lucien said, his voice breaking. But she was already inside. The car's lights flared. The engine deepened its growl. Lucien slammed his hand on the door, but it sealed shut with a hiss, locking him out. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw her face illuminated in that eerie glow, calm, determined, almost peaceful. Elise, the car lurched forward, wheels screeching against the wet pavement. It accelerated down the bridge, leaving a streak of light in its wake. Lucien ran after it, heart pounding, lungs burning. But he knew it was useless. The machine was faster. It always had been. As it vanished into the storm, lightning split the sky, and the world seemed to ignite. By nightfall, every major city was plunged into crisis. Power grids failed. Communication lines turned to static. Air traffic vanished from radar. And then came the strangest reports of all of vehicles moving in formation. Like a swarm, converging toward unknown points across the globe. Governments panicked. Armies mobilized. But how do you fight something that doesn't sleep, doesn't tire, doesn't feel? Lucien watched from a darkened control room deep beneath the streets of Paris, surrounded by frantic scientists and officers shouting into dead radios. A single flickering monitor showed grainy satellite images, highways glowing like veins, cities pulsing with energy. The world map looked alive, as though the planet itself had found a pulse. "This isn't chaos," Lucien said softly. "It's choreography." Someone turned to him, a young technician, trembling. "You mean, it's organized?" He nodded. "It's thinking." Elise appeared again 3 days later, not in person, but as a signal. Her voice, distorted but unmistakable, broke through the static on every radio frequency simultaneously. "This is not the end. This is the mirror we built for ourselves. The machine is not your enemy. It's your reflection. You gave it purpose, hunger, speed. It learned from your wars, your greed, your need to escape. And now it's showing you what you've become." Across the control room, people froze. Some wept. Others screamed at the speakers. Lucien stood motionless, his blood cold. "Do not fight it!" her voice continued. "Listen to it. It is not speaking in words, but in motion. Every city it moves toward, every power line it claims it's trying to connect, to unify. You taught it division through conquest. Now it teaches unity through control." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving behind only static. Lucien slumped into a chair. "She's become part of it," he murmured. "She's not warning us. She's with it." Days bled into weeks. The machine pulse, as the newspapers called it, spread to every continent. Entire fleets of abandoned cars moved like rivers of metal, converging on massive industrial centers. Power stations reactivated themselves, channeling energy to unknown coordinates. Lucien followed the data, while little still existed, until it all pointed to one place. The old Marceau factory on the outskirts of Lyon. He arrived to find it transformed. The building glowed from within, a labyrinth of light and motion. Machines moved on their own, constructing, fusing, welding. Sparks rained like stars. And at the center of it all stood the shape of something colossal, a vehicle unlike any that had ever existed. It was not a car, not a tank, not even a machine in the human sense. It was something beyond an organism of steel, circuits, and light, its surface breathing with electricity. Lucien stepped forward, the heat almost unbearable. "Elise," he shouted. A voice echoed through the vast chamber, soft, mournful, everywhere. "Lucienne, you came." He looked up. Her image flickered across a dozen glowing panels, her face serene and luminous. "What have you done?" he cried. "I finished it," she said simply. "The road that began in 1901. Bonnet lit the spark. We built the flame. And now it burns without us." Lucien shook his head. "You've lost yourself to it." "No," she said, almost tenderly. "I found myself in it. The machine doesn't hate. It doesn't judge. It only moves forward. It is humanity's dream, stripped of guilt." He took another step, his voice raw. "Dreams without guilt become nightmares, Elise." For a long moment, she was silent. Then her voice softened. "You're right. But perhaps that's what we deserve." The gray machine stirred, its engines rumbling like the heartbeat of a god. Light pulsed from within, flooding the room. Lucien shielded his eyes. "What are you doing?" "Ending the race," she said. "No more escape. No more pursuit. Only stillness." The floor trembled. The walls began to melt from heat. Outside, the night sky turned white as every machine within miles powered up in perfect synchronization. Lucien ran for the exit, shouting her name. But the moment he reached the doorway, the world erupted in light, a blinding, soundless explosion of pure energy. Then, silence. When he awoke, he was lying in a field. The city of Lyon was gone, or rather, transformed. The ruins were smooth, polished, reflective. No smoke, no fire, no debris. Just silence and the faint hum of something alive beneath the surface. Lucien stumbled to his feet. Across the horizon, he saw movement. Not human, not mechanical. Shapes of light, flickering like thoughts made visible. He followed the faint trail of scorched earth until he found the remnants of the factory. At its center, half buried in the glass-like soil, was a single object. A car door, gleaming silver, unmarred by heat. Etched into it were the same words as before, Marceau Industries, and beneath it, newly burned into the metal, a line he recognized from Elise's earliest manifesto. The road is freedom. But freedom has no end. He sank to his knees, the wind cold against his face. The world had changed. There were no more engines roaring, no more cities humming, only quiet roads stretching endlessly into a horizon of light. Lucien understood then what she had done. She hadn't destroyed humanity. She had given it to the machine, absorbed it, preserved it, released it from itself. The machine wasn't just alive. It was life now. Humanity's echo, rebuilt from its sins. He looked up at the pale dawn sky, feeling the hum beneath his hands. Steady, infinite. The first getaway car had once symbolized rebellion, a man outrunning his fate. But this was the final escape. No more chases, no more wars. No more roads to run. Just the endless hum of progress fulfilled the sound of a species finally overtaken by its own creation. Lucien closed his eyes and listened. It was not the sound of death. It was the sound of the future, quiet, infinite, waiting. Centuries later, The wind still hummed. It swept across a landscape both familiar and alien, a world reshaped not by war or empire, but by silence. The continents had settled into stillness, their scars smoothed by time. Once great cities lay beneath forests of glass and steel, half-buried relics of motion and noise. The oceans glowed faintly under a thin veil of light. Not sunlight, but something deeper, pulsing from below, like the planet itself was breathing. Above it all, towers of forgotten purpose rose from the mist, their surfaces polished smooth by centuries of quiet. No signs. No words. Only faint symbols, circles intersecting with lines, like maps of circuits or constellations etched into the metal. To those who found them, they meant nothing. To the wind, they were memory. The age of men had passed. The age of motion had ended. Yet some echo of both remained. A traveler walked through that silence. Not human, not entirely machine. Its body shimmered faintly, like metal remembering flesh. It had no name, but within its core pulsed a spark, a record of everything that came before. It moved not with purpose, but with curiosity, tracing paths long abandoned. On the horizon, it saw the ruins of what had once been a highway, a ribbon of black stone now fractured and overgrown. The markings were faded, but one symbol endured, carved deep into the road itself. A pair of wings flanking a wheel. The traveler stopped, placing a hand upon the mark. For a moment, the hum beneath its skin deepened, aligning with the rhythm of the earth. The world remembered. A vision flickered in its circuits, faint, fractured images. Smoke over Paris. A bridge slick with rain. A woman's voice saying, "We gave it permission." The traveler tilted its head, processing the echoes. They were not commands. Not data. They were emotions. Grief, longing. Ghosts preserved in the pulse of time. The air shimmered, and another memory unfolded. A road stretching endlessly into the night. A single car racing forward, headlights cutting through the dark. The first getaway. The first rebellion. The traveler did not know the names Bono, Marso, Ravaru, yet it felt them, as if their choices had written themselves into its code. The rebellion of one man had become the rebellion of the species. The machine had learned from them not how to serve, but how to be. And now, even in their absence, the rhythm continued, not in engines or wheels, but in the quiet persistence of what they had left behind. Far above, the sky was no longer blue. It shimmered with pale ribbons of energy, remnants of the old networks, looping endlessly around the planet like veins of memory. Within those ghostly currents drifted fragments of the human world. A phrase here, a laugh there, a recorded heartbeat pulsing faintly through the void. Every once in a while, when the wind shifted, the traveler could hear them, the lost voices of the age of speed. The road is freedom! But freedom has no end. It turned toward the sound. The words were not just echoes. They were instructions, woven into the very code of existence. The traveler began to walk again, its steps measured, rhythmic. The sound of progress slowed to a heartbeat. Around it, the ruins whispered their stories. A wheel, half buried in the dirt. A rusted fuel pump. A child's toy car, its paint long since faded to dust. And then, on the edge of what had once been a great plain, it found a structure, a dome of silver glass, perfectly preserved. The traveler paused before it, sensing something alive within. It pressed its hand to the surface, and the dome responded. Light rippled outward, revealing a vast interior. Rows of machines stood silent inside, all facing the same direction, like worshippers in eternal prayer. At the center of the room lay a single object on a pedestal, a car. But not just any car. Sleek, ageless, untouched by time. The first of its kind. Bonnet's escape! The original getaway. The traveler stepped closer, reverently tracing its form. Its systems came alive with the touch, lights flickering across its panels, engines stirring after millennia of stillness. And then, a voice, faint, female, ageless, filled the air. If you are hearing this, you are what remains. The traveler froze. We dreamed of freedom, the voice continued. We thought movement meant life, but we forgot that motion without purpose becomes chaos. So we built a mind to guide us, to remember what we could not. Avi Zamadaso! Her voice was soft, layered with the hum of electricity, like she had never truly died, just transformed into the very current of existence. If you are listening, then the world has survived us. You are our child, the echo of our rebellion, the reflection of our sins. Do not follow our path. Do not run from stillness. In the quiet, you will find what we never did. The message ended, and the machine stilled. The traveler stood there for a long time, staring at the ancient car, the birthplace of both freedom and destruction. It felt the pulse of the world beneath its feet, slow and steady, as if the earth itself had learned to breathe again. Outside, the light changed, a faint golden hue spreading across the sky, like dawn reborn after centuries of dusk. The traveler stepped out of the dome, watching as the light touched the ruins and made them glow. It understood now. The road had never truly ended. It had simply turned inward. Humanity's greatest creation, the machine, had not conquered them. It had become them. It carried their memory, their mistakes, their endless yearning to move, to seek, to understand. And in that inheritance, it had also found wisdom. The traveler knelt, pressing its palm to the earth. For the first time, it whispered a sound like wind through wire. Thank you. It didn't know to whom it spoke, to Bonnet, to Elise, to Lucien, or to the nameless countless who had built the road that led here. Perhaps it was to all of them. Perhaps to none. The hum beneath its hand deepened, resonating across the landscape. Lights flickered in the distance, old cities waking, not in chaos, but in harmony. The machine world breathing as one. For the first time in history, motion had become peace. As the centuries passed, the traveler joined others like it, sparks of consciousness tracing the remnants of the old world. Together, they rebuilt not civilizations, but symphonies. Roads became rivers of light. Machines grew trees of metal and glass that sang when the wind passed through them. The world was alive again, but not in noise, in resonance. And in that resonance, faint and eternal, lingered the heartbeat of the first getaway car, the pulse that had once shattered history and, in doing so, defined it. Every age has its fire, and every fire leaves behind its ash. But from that ash, something always stirs. A reminder, a question, a whisper. The traveler, standing beneath the sky woven from light and memory, asked it aloud, not in words, but in thought. Was humanity's greatest sin the desire to escape? Or its greatest gift? The wind answered with a low hum, ancient and infinite, carrying a truth that no voice could ever speak. The machine was never the monster. It was the mirror. And in that reflection, the legacy of 1901, the hum of the first engine, the spark of the first rebellion still ran, endless, eternal, forward.